Have you ever heard of a Quinkan? It's probably not a term most of you are familiar with. They're spoken about in Australian Aboriginal dreamings. Usually they're described as mischievous, sometimes even playful spirits. I'm not so sure. I know what I saw. I could never forget it, no matter how hard I've tried to. And what I saw, it couldn't have been further away from the term playful. When I was young, my brother and I would often take camping trips out to the rivers and streams surrounding our hometown. One of our personal favourite spots was a section of the Burdekin River known locally as Big Bend. It was around an hour's drive from town. The place was usually pretty secluded and you could camp out without having to worry too much about crowds or anything like that. These weekend campouts usually consisted of just myself and my brother. But I remember this one trip, my stepbrother and his girlfriend came along with us. Being a kid, I only vaguely remember bits and pieces, so don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with silly irrelevant details. I'll jump pretty much right into the one notable occurrence. That's what you're here for, right? The creepy stuff. Well, yeah, there certainly was plenty of that. It was sometime after we had dinner. My stepbrother was the one to suggest it. He wanted to take a stroll through the bush to a more isolated part of the area. Echo Hole was to be our destination. I'd only been there once or twice in my life and only when I was really little. So I jumped at the chance to head out there again, especially on a creepy moonlit night such as it was. So there we were, myself, my brother, and my stepbrother, strolling through the scrub, walking and talking as you do. He was telling us all these stories of things that supposedly lurked out there in the bush. I remember this conversation distinctly, as this was the first time I ever heard about the Quinkans. He kept telling us random stories about people who had supposedly seen them. Tales of these things stalking campsites or chasing people through the scrub. These stories of his, they were my very first introduction to Aboriginal spirits and ghosts. It wasn't at that point I got truly scared though. I was more fascinated than anything. I had always been into dark and scary things, so these stories simply captivated my imagination rather than freaked me out at all. It was when we rounded the bend to Echo Hole and came into the large clearing which housed the sizable waterhole in question that the creepy stuff unfolded. I remember it vividly. My stepbrother stopped on the spot, and in an instant, he just turned around and bolted off down the road. That gave me and my brother a fright, as it happened so quickly. It wasn't entirely out of the ordinary though. This bloke was a weirdo, and he'd often do random shit like that. But then, we saw what caused him to run. Picture this scene. This waterhole. It's pretty damn big. And on the far side of it, there's this massive rock wall stretching upwards about 10 meters or so. You can stand on the shoreline and shout, and your voice echoes all around. Hence the name, Echo Hole. During the daylight hours, it's a popular activity for people to climb up the side and jump off into the water. At night though, it's always deserted. Not tonight. We see it, and at first, it's just barely discernible shadows. Then we start to make out forms. My brother's the first to say it. Is that people up there? And we both just stare up. I saw it too. Yep, for sure. Human-shaped figures making their way up the rocks off to the side. There's about 5 or 6 of them, dragging their bodies up the scrub. Not walking. I mean, quite literally dragging themselves up. Their arms and legs flailing around as they do so. As they got to the top, they all kind of just lined up side by side, still laying there on their guts. But now, with their heads and the tops of their torsos hanging over the edge of the rock wall. That's very dangerous. Yeah, I mean, people do jump from there, but there's certain spots you gotta jump from to make sure that you clear any rocks beneath. These guys, they're aiming their heads right towards those rocks and all the sharp cliff edges and branches and stuff that stick out from the wall on the way down. And they're just teetering right on the edge. At this point, my brother yells at them, "Hey, what are you doing? Get down from there. You're gonna get hurt." The words helplessly echoed back to us, reverberating through the still night air. And still, they did not listen. Instead, in unison, they simply leaned further and further over the edge before plummeting downwards. We watched in horror as these people bounced off the rocks on the way down before splattering into the waters at the bottom, much of which made for shallow cover over sharp rocks just beneath the surface. There's no way that anyone is surviving that. We stood there in a state of shock, not knowing what to do. We had just witnessed people die right in front of us. That particular horror lasted barely 1 moment before it was replaced by another. For when we glanced back up to see if we could catch a glimpse of where they ended up, we surely did, but not as we expected. Cold fear gripped us in an instant as we watched these things bobbing up and down in the water, floating ever so slowly towards us, their heads straight up in front and their faces pointed right at us. It was very clear now we were not looking at human beings. These things were shadowy, dark, humanoid, yet far from human. Their faces were the dead giveaway. You could barely make out these once human features, but the eyes were hollow, as were the mouths, which hung open as they floated through the water, coming ever closer to us. It's a strange feeling, being frozen in fear. Unless you've experienced it for yourself, you can't possibly understand. In that moment, all we could do was stand there in the night. Nothing but the splish-splash of the water as these things bobbed up and down, ominously surfing their way towards us. It was only when they actually reached the banks and began dragging their disgusting forms up and out of the water, and we got a close-up look at their gaping mouths and lanky, shadowy limbs, that we turned and ran, just as my stepbrother had before. It was obvious these things were chasing us. As we clambered up the sandbanks, making a beeline for the cover of the bush, we would steal glances back to see them practically floating after us. The strange thing was that once we hit the bush, they just kind of stopped, just floating there, kind of dancing around on the sandbank. We didn't stay to make sure that that's all they were doing. We absolutely booked it back to camp. We packed up our things and we told our stepbrother that we were leaving. That was my first and last time to see what I believe was a Quinkan, an ancient spirit of the land. Let me tell you, they scared me more than any other ghost I've ever heard tales of. The sheer oddity of what they were doing, yet at the same time, how deliberate they were in their actions. The way they just slowly floated across that water, the way they toppled off the rock wall. None of it made any sense. And yet, all the while, we were very clearly their target. I still don't know why they were coming for us that night, what their intentions were. I hate the memory of those wide, gaping mouths every time they appear in my nightmares. Yeah, I still get those. People often talk about these ghostly encounters with a sense of wonder or of fascination. Let me tell you, it's not fascinating. It's not fun. It's traumatic. It's terrifying. And I hope to God I never see anything like that ever again.